Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on what time zone you're in. I'm super excited on today's panel that we get to really deep dive into one of the industry's leading fleets, specifically around the recognition they received for best fleets to drive for. If you're not familiar with the recognition around best fleets to drive for, Mark Morrell from Carrier's Edge is here, and he's going to really share the premise of what it takes and the work it takes to one, be nominated for this award, and then two, to be recognized for this award. I also have Andrew Aaron here from PGT, whose team is a great team to work with. We were talking offline about all the exciting opportunities they're working with their drivers. But maybe I can let both of you introduce yourself today, and then we can kind of jump into the conversation around tips for best fleets to drive for, how to put you on stage next year and join the community. Mark, do you want to start and kind of talk about the program itself and the platform and the process?
Yeah, I'll give you the quick overview of that. So hello, everybody. I'm Mark Morrell. I'm the president of Carrier's Edge, and we produce the Best Fleets to Drive For program, which we have done for 16 finished years, and we are now in the middle of our 17th year of evaluating the best workplaces in the North American trucking industry. So it is an extensive process. To participate in the program, fleets need to be nominated by a driver or owner-operator working with them. They can't just decide that they're going to be winners themselves. It starts with the driver and ultimately ends with the driver as well. So after the fleets are nominated, we ask them a lot of different questions in a lot of different areas. It is a grueling process for them to go through. We look into pretty much every corner of the business and all of the things that fleets are doing for their drivers and ask them a lot of questions that many have never really thought about before. And then we interview them as well. And after all of that, the drivers get to have their say and provide their feedback on the company. After putting all of those things together and scoring it, identifying the things that fleets are doing that are working really well, we unveil the winners, the top 20 best fleets to drive for every year, only 20, regardless of how many participate, how many are nominated. There's only 20 winners each year. But we do also have some fleets to watch that are on their way to making that list. And we do have a Hall of Fame for the people that have been there year after year after year. But these are the fleets that are really the cream of the crop, the pinnacle in terms of not just providing a good experience for their drivers, but pushing the industry forward in how to best work with drivers to provide an efficient, safe, and profitable company. So it is a lot of work every year to do that compilation for both us and the fleets. And it is a really good way to look at what's happening now and what is coming in the future. And the fleets that are on that list really are going above and beyond for their drivers. So we share all of those results through publications. We have a conference at the beginning of March where we will unveil the overall winners and share the details of everything that we found. And every year it is an exciting exercise to go through to see what the state of the industry is and what's new.
That's awesome. So, Andrea, and it's not for free, right? I mean, I'm sure that you probably aged at a larger incremental ratio than the normal going through this process. But I'd sure welcome, say hello. And like I said, I know this process is not easy, but congratulations. And, I'm super excited to kind of deep dive into this.
Thank you, Adam. And Mark, it's a real pleasure and honor to be here talking with you. As you guys mentioned, my name's Andy Aaron. I'm the Vice President of Safety and Training at PGT. Tell you a little bit about PGT, then I'll swing back around to Best Fleets. We are primarily a flatbed trucking company. We haul a lot of steel, aluminum, building products, Been in business 43 years, based out of Pittsburgh, but we're across the United States, as far west as Phoenix and Laredo, Texas, and up into Maine and New England every day as well. So pretty broad coverage. Mark used the word gruesome, Adam, and I noted that because that's fair. I've been involved in the application process, and answering the questionnaire is grueling. It's a very extensive set of questions, ranging from how you recruit, how do you manage drivers, what's the driver experience like, and there's an interview, there's surveys with drivers, as Mark mentioned. But it's a great opportunity to, first of all, to reflect, because I'll tell you, I've been responsible for answering these questions, and I've read them, and I read the question again, and I think, well, that's interesting, because what it's implying is something maybe that I hadn't considered before. And it gives you opportunities to rethink your processes and ask yourself, how driver-oriented are you really? Are you paying, hey, like, you might say that we're all about drivers. Drivers aren't numbers here. I think everybody says that. But the questions are excellent because they force you to confront how true that is. And obviously at PGT, I think that it's true here. But if I'm totally honest, we all fall short sometimes, and there's always opportunities to improve. And that's been, for me, the most rewarding part of being part of this process. As much as I enjoy recognition, I know PGT enjoys recognition. The best part for us is going to that conference that Mark mentioned and getting the thing I'm most interested in is the data afterwards, where it shows, okay, here's where, because you get a lot of information afterwards. And you can see, okay, we scored a 3 here. We could have done better. First of all, who's doing better and why? What are they doing? What are these other people doing? And then we meet afterwards. We meet for the weeks after that scoring process is over as a group to decide, hey, do we need to do something differently about the way we're handling, let's say, training and orientation pay? Because it looks like other people might be doing it a little better than us, and we got to rethink, is there something we ought to change? And every year, part of this process, we've made adjustments, because we didn't win it the first year we applied, and we did not like that. So it's been a good process for us. As grueling, yes, Mark, that's the right word, as grueling as it can be. If you're interested in being good, and we are interested in being very good, then you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to be willing to put yourself in a competition and benchmark yourself against your peers. That's why we like this program so much. So it's a real honor to be here today and talking a little bit about the stuff we're doing that I think has been successful for us.
Yeah. So I know that when we talked offline, I take notes and notes when I listen to you talk, Andy, because, one of the takeaways that I know in talking with you and if I ever need a little pick me up in the industry, I usually, I enjoy talking to you in the sense that your team is very connected with the drivers. And, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but the initial process, it's a driver nomination for the fleet to apply for the questionnaire. So you're already doing something right by having the positive momentum of the driver saying, hey, boss, maybe we should go for this thing. But then I know in talking with you, Andy, there's quite a bit of passion and empathy and a connection with the drivers. And maybe you can chat a little bit about that, and then we can share some of the data that supports those activities and those conversations and those engagements.
Sure. I'll go first, and Mark, you can jump in terms of how you see others maybe doing similar stuff. I always go back to my experience. I started here with no experience in trucking, and I was managing drivers directly. I was a fleet manager or dispatcher, I guess, by another term. And I was fortunate to have drivers who worked for me who were million-mile safe drivers who had been at PGT for decades and who knew how to do the job. And I found myself in the position of having to be their boss as a 20-something kid who didn't know enough. And so if I'd come in and said, hey, I know everything, and you guys have to listen to me, and let me tell you why you need to slow down or idle your truck less or do something differently, I know I never would have gotten a response that would have helped anybody. So I pretty quickly realized that the approach was going to have to be first of all, where you start with a lot of respect for the driver and appreciation for everything they've accomplished. And by using like open-ended questions, asking them, hey, what do you think we ought to do? You end up with a lot better results. So I had a former driver, his name was Terry, and Terry's since passed, but I think about him a lot because he would tell me, you got to listen to the drivers. And he would bring up, a lot of times when we fell short of that. Like, I remember the 2013 Internationals we ordered didn't have a cabinet in it that the older trucks we previously had did. And he never let me forget that, even though I was like the lowest guy in the totem pole. I did not spec the trucks that year. But he never let me forget that, because it was actually, in its core, was a really good message, which is Terry had to live in that truck. And I got to sit in a nice office, and a guy like me shouldn't order a truck without talking to a guy like him first. He was dead right about that. And I think about that a lot with Terry. So when I was talking to those drivers, like I'm trying to talk to Terry, who's a very opinionated guy, and his peers about, hey, I need you to do something differently in the way you're driving. Again, I couldn't come down hard on him. I'd have to just ask him questions. So the way I worked for me is I'd show him pictures of accidents and say, hey, I'm going to show you this picture. We were just involved in a bad accident. And I don't know. And I would humble myself. I don't know what's going on. What do you think this guy did wrong? And I know I was kind of playing dumb. Like we had a sense of what had happened, but I'd let him tell me, you know what, he was probably, I know that intersection. I know that interchange in the PA Turnpike. You got to get over there because people will swing in and they don't know the stopping distance of the truck. So all I do is just ask them, hey, what do you think? And 99 times out of 100, the angry, recalcitrant kind of driver who has been through a lot of fleet managers in his career will tell me everything that I wanted him to know, right? And he already knows it, but it's powerful if it comes from his mouth. And so I'd redirect it as, hey, what should I tell him? I got a brand new driver on my board. What should I tell him went wrong here? And he'd tell me perfectly, exactly what I wanted to hear. So that's one tip that we've had that's really worked well for us, which is to not pretend like, if you don't like, I don't have a CDL. If you don't have a CDL, don't pretend like you do, and don't pretend like you know everything. But I do know that, hey, like certain behaviors are dangerous and I don't want to have an accident. So what can we do? And let the driver talk to you about it. 99 times out of 100, that works great for us.
Yeah, no, that's great. Mark, and I know your team works with not only with PGT, but with many others in the industry. And I know that we were talking offline before we started the webinar, the importance of, driver engagement in a respectful way. And I know a lot of the tools that your company offers really follows that guideline in the sense of allowing drivers to coach themselves, learn, train, where it's self-coaching versus being told versus being taught. And, I think those are really key fundamentals. And maybe you can, hopefully I didn't steal any of your thunder, but I'd be super interested in your insights into, what PGT and others are really thinking about in the sense of engaging drivers.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we have seen in both sides of our business, both the Best Fleets to Drive For program and our core business of driver safety training, is that at a fundamental level, most drivers want to do a good job. They are in the industry because they actually like driving trucks. They like doing the work. They like delivering freight. They like being out there, and they want to do it well. And when people want to do a job well, they want to be involved in getting better at it. They want to learn how to do it better. They want to learn what's coming, ways that they can be more efficient, and they want to be part of helping their fleet get better as well. And so we built our training product with that assumption that drivers want to get better. So let's not insult them or patronize them. Let's build something that helps them to develop their own skills and treat them like professionals, treat them like adults. And what we've seen across the Best Fleets to Drive For program is that the companies that really have success have that same mentality towards everything that they're doing within the organization. I mean, Andy was just talking about asking drivers. It's a really simple thing, but not a lot of companies do it in a lot of areas. You had a great example about asking them about speccing equipment. For the longest time, when we asked fleets how they decide on their equipment speccing, the answer was, well, the owner decides. or the shop decides on, it's everybody but the drivers involved. And we've seen that really shift in the past 5 years, that people get drivers involved because drivers are involved anyway because they're using those trucks, and they will provide insights that can actually save the company money. You don't want to buy a truck that's not going to make you money, so the drivers can help with that. Same thing with trip planning, with coaching, with safety, with pretty much everything that the business is doing. Drivers are going to have insights on that. And the companies that are asking those drivers, that are getting them involved in those processes, are the ones that end up having the most success. We're going to talk a fair bit about coaching today, and that has been something that has really evolved over the past 6 to 8 years. We have seen it really shift. We've seen the entire approach towards cameras and coaching shift, and now fleets are really getting their drivers engaged. And all you have to do is ask them what they want and make a list of these things that they suggest and do some of them. And then the key part is let them know what you're doing, and what for the things that you can't do, let them know why. And the companies that do those things always have success. The companies that say, okay, you've said we're going to do these, you want these things, we're going to do these 3 because we can do them right now. These other 5 are great ideas that we can't do now, and here's why. Drivers buy into that, they understand it. And even over the past 2 years, where the economy has really been in bad shape for the industry, the companies that talk to their drivers and engage them in good communication have been able to cut pay. They've been able to reduce miles. They've been able to lower their expenses and not see a huge spike in turnover, and not see really unsatisfied drivers, because the drivers understand that times are tough and the company's doing what they can do. So it makes a huge difference, just getting drivers involved, get them in the loop, make sure they understand what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to go to the next one of these next slides here, and I'm very tuned. So let's say one of my side interests. Let's keep it on this slide here, slide 2. One of my side interests, I'm really tuned to numbers, and also to I'll call it the external forces that are against commercial trucking, call it plaintiff attorneys and so on. And so there's this really big mix of how to do the right thing and then get people excited about doing the right thing. And I think transparency has definitely increased over the last couple of years. On the right-hand side of this slide, if you've invested any time thinking about safety in the past, you've probably been aware of Dr. Heinrich and Dr. Bird's studies on, they call it the Heinrich Triangle. And essentially, the first part of the research is about 100 years old. The second part is about 50 years old. But the bottom line says if you do unsafe things too often, probably something bad's going to happen. And I think the shift that we've seen in the industry is where we start to lean towards not maybe focusing on the things you're doing wrong, but sharing the things that you're doing right. Because I think, Andy, and I'm going to draw on your experience here, is, if you can get drivers who are engaged and you walk through the door together, the results happen much faster than, let's say, if you have to pull someone through the door and force them. The 2 elements that we added on the bottom are, instead of eliminating unsafe acts, I think the trend that I've seen, and Mark, you just made mention to it, is that more and more companies are starting to highlight safe acts and getting drivers excited about, hey, every time I talk to the boss or I get a message, it might not be what I'm doing wrong, but from time to time it could be, hey, here's what you're doing right. And the other piece I think that's really interesting is there's plenty of studies, and we do it here at Netrodyne. Most fleets do it. They start to get a sense for the types of actions that are correlated to an accident. And on the left-hand side, it's an internal study that we did here at Netrodyne, where we looked at about 250,000 drivers over 6 months, and we tracked the accidents that they had, and we plotted their scores And so we really had a sense for is somebody's score, and what the outcome of that study wasn't surprising. Drivers with lower scores had more accidents than drivers that had higher scores. But it also gives a great opportunity to have a very transparent conversation with drivers about, hey, if your score goes up 20 points, or if you eliminate this one driving aspect, not only does it feel good because you've done a good job, but there's a direct connection to the health of the company and the resources that are available, and the options to buy that next level vehicle versus the baseline vehicle now become more realistic. And so I think, Andy, I'm interested in kind of how you might really connect with drivers in terms of their score and what it means to the company, because obviously you're doing a lot of things right in that space, and sometimes it's a difficult conversation, but I think transparency is one of the things that definitely sets best in class fleets versus others.
Sure. So, one thing Mark mentioned a few moments ago was that drivers, they drive because they like doing it and they take their job seriously and they want to be good at it as professionals. I've certainly found that to be true. Maybe put differently, drivers are also, as a group, very proud and generally pretty competitive, which is great for us, right? Because if they take pride in what they do, they probably are more willing to hear about how they can be better. And if you can set up some kind of gamification scheme or another way to leverage their natural desire to be better than their buddy or to be better than they were last month, that can help you. So we've certainly seen that true. In fact, calling me on my cell phone right now, I just felt my watch vibrating, is a fleet owner. Okay, I'll tell you a story about this fleet owner. So PGT, we've got a composite fleet, including some small fleet owners. You might have 10 trucks or 100 trucks, and you can be signed on the
I like it real time. Right, probably listening to on the webinar.
Yeah, sorry. The guy who, no, I'm not lying. The guy who's really calling me right now. He didn't believe in this idea of the green zone score if you go back about a year ago. He is a former driver who has a fleet of around, I think, 11 or 12 drivers that work for him. He's an agent now and is doing real well for himself, and we're happy for him and proud of that. But he kind of came in cynical to this concept, that the concept being that if this abstract thing like the Netrodyne green zone score is higher, then that means that you're less likely to be in an accident. And I think maybe the reason that he didn't like the idea was that his drivers, when viewed in that light, weren't viewed as the highest, best drivers in the company. Now, to try to help him see the light, one of the things I did is I showed him this graph because I got access to this a couple of months ago. But we also just talked to him about this idea that, hey, like the scoring comes from things we know, otherwise we'd all agree are unsafe. Things that we know are likely to lead to accidents, like tailgating, that is following too closely, or speeding, or rolling through stop signs, or God forbid running a red light or something like that. And surely we all agree those things are dangerous, right? So how do you take 11 hours of driving 5 days a week, which no one could on their, I can't staff people to sit and watch that. How do you turn that into a rough number? That's what this is. So eventually we get a little buy-in and we see, hey, if you just do me the favor of reducing some speeding or backing off your following distance a little bit, you see that, hey, we are actually being involved in less accidents. And I know we got some data here we can show in a little bit that shows over the course of the last few years, we've had a really good run rate on being involved in fewer accidents, and an even more dramatically improved rate of being involved in fewer serious accidents where people get hurt and DOT accidents. And there's a pretty close correlation, while we've been improving on that side of things, to our green zone score going up. And so the argument takes care of itself when you start talking to people and say, look, here, this is what the last years looked like. We've gotten better. At the same time, these accident rates have gone down. It's not accidental. And the argument ends up, you prevail eventually when you help people understand, look, we're trying to help you. We have a safe driver banquet, 1 million miles. Oh yeah, here's the slide that shows that correlation. So this is last 2 years or so of Green Zone score, and thanks. This is our accident rate. So
yeah, so the gray line is essentially a rolling 24-month average of your reportables, which a couple years ago you're in the 0.6s. Now you're in the the 0.2s. Which is a fantastic. That's the trend you want. But the green line there is essentially the fleet's green zone score. Now, this is a lagging indicator, right? So, accident reduction tends to follow good driving, at some period of time. But again, the real conversation, I think, is, hey, let me show you these two numbers, where one goes up, one goes down. And when that gray number goes down, we get to do more things together, off that list. If you have a list of 10 things you want me to do, before I could do 3, now I can do 7. And that's motivating to the workforce, because like with any employee, if you can get connected to the end result, you feel, engaged employees always outperform other employees who are not connected.
Right. And the drivers, even those who might be skeptical of this concept, because again, it feels somewhat removed maybe at first glance. Even those drivers, they think they're great, safe drivers. There's no one you talk to who wants to argue with you that says, yeah, you know what, I'm not a very good driver. They think they're good, and a lot of times they're right. So you leverage that and say, look, we want you to be great. I want to see you at the Million Mile Driver Banquet, and that's my job. My job is to get you and everybody else there, and see you and your wife, and congratulate you on a pretty amazing achievement. If you spin it that way, if you frame it within, hey, look, you're good at your job. We all are trying to get better around here, because none of us want to be on the side of the road. You want to have your day ruined by an accident, or God forbid, it's worse than that, right? So let's talk about what we can do to be even better than what we are now. People buy into that. I'm from Pittsburgh, big sports town. A lot of our drivers are sports fans. You talk to them about like, hey, do you think the Kansas City Chiefs still practice? Like, yeah. And I bet they talk about blocking and tackling every day at practice. They take their job as professionals seriously, even though they learned about blocking and tackling in Pee Wee football. We approach it the same way, and we say, look, yeah, I know you've heard this before, but we spend every day here trying to get better, trying to be a safer company, trying to be a better driver-focused company, a better place to work, better service our customers. So that means we work every day on these things. It's not an attack on anybody, but it's an opportunity for us to be professionals and get better. Yeah,
and it's interesting. A lot of I love the celebration around a Million Mile element. Now for some drivers that might take 8 years, it might take 12 years. It is an incredible career accomplishment. I'm awed when I see people are in the 3 or 5 million range, because that's a lifetime. When I looked at some of the data, although this is a lagging indicator, it's kind of like telling somebody, hey, you need to drain the ocean. Well, that seems like a really, massive effort. The other piece that I looked at, which I think is interesting with Green Zone score, and again, this is the last 12 months of your team's operation, is the leading indicator, where you might be able to be very prescriptive. And I know you just mentioned it about any particular driver. Hey, how do I get my score from 800 to 850? Or how do I go from 850 to 875 or 875 to 900? I think that there is also this direct correlation, which is very interesting, and you can see it in the chart here, where as Green Zone goes up, things like severe alerts go down. Or actually the other way, when severe alerts go down, Green Zone goes up, which is now makes it more personal, right? So a company goal is fantastic, but knowing your part in that plan, I think, is even more engaging, because every driver now says, hey, if I do my part, then the greater good, we all benefit. It's kind of like the John Adams, theory, back in the movie John Nash with A Beautiful Mind, where he says, if we all do well, then, that's better than just one person doing well.
Yeah.
I I'm nerding out a little bit because I actually watched when we first started Netrodyne, and I was part of the team that came up with the green zone score, and now we're just about to launch our 4th iteration of the scoring, and it took me out of the process and put more data scientists and statisticians into it. But when I was starting to think about like team scores, when you watch that movie, A Beautiful Mind with Dr. Nash, and the scene in the bar where they're talking about which, there was a couple attractive ladies, and they're talking about the strategies to all, have drinks with, pretty ladies. In that sense, that's when Dr. Nash essentially said, no, wait, when we all do better, versus John Adams, who says, hey, battle, the individual who does the best should benefit. His comment was, when we all do better, the entire team, benefits. So I really, as I'm sitting there, I'm like, yeah, that's green zone score. That's it. So, it's always fun to listen to the actual real life deployment and the conversations around it.
Right. Now,
can I just make a couple of comments on that? Because there's two things that sort of slipped by that maybe not everybody in the audience catches. And as kind of a bit of a bystander on some of this, I want to draw the attention to them. One of them was, Andy, when you're talking about rolling out the system and the things that you're doing, you talk about it with a bit of humility, as like, we don't really know what was going to happen. We thought that this was going to happen, and we tried it, and we got buy-in from the drivers, and it worked. And that kind of honesty is one thing that we've seen as a real shift in the past 3 years that works really well for fleets. It used to be that the fleet would go in and they would say, we're putting in this and we're doing it because we know what's best, and drivers get used to it, it's coming. And drivers would have to deal with it. And what's really shifted in the past few years is fleets have said, okay, we think this is going to help us. We're bringing you in to be part of it. We're going to start small, and then when it works, or if it works, we will expand it from there. But yeah, we think it's going to work, but we don't know for sure. We're hopeful, and here's what we've been told, and here's what the information is. It looks like it's going to work. Drivers work with us and help us make this a success. That brings the team together a lot better, and you end up having way more success with these things than you would otherwise. And so I think the way you've rolled it out and got everybody on board has really ended up being very helpful, and part of the reason that you're seeing the success with it, because that approach makes all the difference in the world. The second thing that I was sort of thinking about as you're talking, Adam, you're talking about the green zone score, and you guys are talking about gamifying things a little bit, but there is something that's interesting and sort of different about the way Netrodyne has done that, and that is that you've gamified it in a way that isn't patronizing. Because one of the things that we've found with all of the fleets that are part of the program, everybody has gone through periods where they've tried different things, and some of those things have worked and some of them didn't. And there was a period kind of pre-COVID, just sort of leading into that period, where people were trying a lot of different things where it was really focused on gamification. And drivers did not like, in general, gamification that was too much bells and whistles and too much toy-like stuff. They don't want anything sort of, and I'm generalizing massively across the drivers that do the surveys. They really did not like things that seemed like toys, or seemed like kind of childlike, or like they're going to a video arcade. They all have that natural inclination of competitiveness where they want to do better, and they want to do better than their peers and improve what they're doing, but they want to do that in a way that doesn't feel like they're being put into a kindergarten. And what Netrodyne has done with that green zone score is find a really nice way to navigate that, to go right down the middle with something that appeals to that interest in improving, both at the individual level and the company level, but do so without patronizing drivers. And so you've done a really nice job of that, and drivers respond to it. And certainly we see it in the fleets that are Netrodyne customers. The driver surveys reflect that satisfaction about that approach. So it's a really nice way of approaching things.
I'm going to second Mark's comment about that, because the dream for us, at least, is a driver who's interacting with the Netron app, which we've also got loaded on their ELD so they can see it. And they're texting their buddy saying, hey, I was a 998 this week. I'm number 3. What are you, what number are you? And they're egging each other on because they're competitive and because they're looking for connection, but also because they take their job seriously. They view themselves as professionals. They think that they are among the best, if not the very best professional driver in the world. So they want to lord it over their buddy. And that's an amazing thing for me. I love that because I can only employ so many driver coaches in the office, and they are doing the job for me. And those are, almost without exception, our highest green zone drivers are engaged in text message threads with 5, 6, 10 other drivers, and they're pushing each other and egging each other on. And all my camera coaches called out sick for 2 weeks. Those guys would still be pushing each other. They'd be as good as they've ever been or better. And that's because they don't, like Mark was saying, it's not a gimmick. They don't feel patronized. I'm not treating them like they're kids. But I am saying, hey, we believe in this process and this assessment of the likelihood of being in an accident. And we're asking everyone to have a high expectation of themselves. And we found that almost without exception, the driver response has been really positive. So well done, Adam.
Yeah, no. So I think it's really interesting, and here's an interesting chart that really I think supports that, right? So as we start to think about drivers who are getting excited about recognition, about involvement, engagement, I think the idea of any safety program is to eliminate risk. And if you don't fill it with something, risk comes back, right? So what I really appreciate with a number of our customers is that once they eliminate risk, they fill it with recognition, right? Envy. Envy is a huge tool, right? So, Andy, you just mentioned something that, I tell a lot of our customers, if you got 100 drivers in the room, which scenario would you rather have? Walk in and say, you 5 drivers need to go see HR, and then the other 95 drivers to be on edge, or to walk in and go, you 5 drivers were best in class. Here's a special hat that no one else has, right? So envy in that latter scenario, envy seems to really have a powerful pull, to performance. And what the chart here that I'm showing here is kind of that premise of when I take away risk and I put something back in. So there are tens and 20,000s of driver stars that PGT achieves every week. And a driver star is, you have a driving aspect that says, hey, you're doing everything right. You're in the right-hand lane. I think, Andy, you talked to me about, a section of the road where drivers know that if you're not in the right-hand lane at this point, then you're going to have all sorts of trouble with the exits. Drivers know where to be. Sometimes the cars on the road don't know where to be, and the drivers have to respond. But in the case where a driver gets cut off and then comes off the throttle, creates space, someone's merging on the lane with them, and they don't fight for that space, or they have an emergency vehicle on the shoulder of the road. These are all great driving aspects where you train the drivers and you can kind of recognize that they're doing well. The other driver stars are more like master class, right? 10,000 hours of mastery. We reward drivers for consecutive full stops, hours driving, at the speed limit or below, hours of driving, with good following distance and so on. What I see here in this chart, what this shows is starts to kind of give a KPI of like, how do I really pulse how the drivers are doing? And this is one way to look at it, saying in the absence of, I'll call it problematic driving, what's happening is good driving, right? And so this chart, as an example, over the last 12 months has your drivers almost a 60% improvement in doing, I'll call it, more good driving aspects than, historic problematic areas that you'd have to coach and, that are associated with accidents. So when we showed the earlier chart of accidents going down, it's not by happenstance, right? It's very intentional. And like this chart right here starts to give you that your drivers are engaged, and that this is a great check mark, and how you kind of pulse the what you're doing. So Andy, I'm surely interested in kind of how driver stars are kind of presented, because it's a very unique tool. It gives them a thumbs up, a high five, which I haven't seen. I think fear has always been the motivator of improvement versus like praise, and I'm very interested in how you've really kind of folded this in. The driver stars, and is it a big deal? Is it is it a safety meeting call out? Is it a video roll that's in the driver lounge, or how do you go ahead.
So, I'm not a social scientist, but my understanding of behavioralism is that recognizing positive behavior is a lot more effective at changing and influencing people than either the absence of that or some kind of actual negative reinforcement. So we do believe in these driver stars quite a bit, and we find every opportunity we can to recognize drivers for excellence, and it's very often via driver stars or just a high net trend score that gets us there. Just to talk a little bit about the driver stars a little bit, like a very common one is we're driving down the road, we have a good following distance, and a car cuts in directly in front of us. That happens all the time. We all know that happens all the time. And it's a great little vignette because, all right, so in that moment, you have a situation where it's potentially a dangerous following distance condition, but it was created by the other party. So is that in that moment, hey, our driver's tailgating, or is that, hey, there's an unsafe condition that was caused by a motorist who doesn't understand the stopping distance requirements of a 80,000-pound vehicle, right? We all know who work in trucking that it's very often the motorists who don't get it and they're cutting in across lanes. So to have the opportunity to say, hey, our driver in that scenario, when that motorist cut in front of him, he lets off the accelerator and creates this space so that if somebody stabs their brake pedal, he's not ended up in their rear seat. If I can pick up the phone and call him and say, hey, I just want to recognize you've done that like 15 times this week, and you're leading the company in that, and I thank you for that. That's a behavior that would never be recognized without a tool like this, because I would never know. Like I remember working with drivers before we had these things, and I would only know they're involved in an accident and some accelerometer data I got from an ELD. Besides that, I wouldn't know enough. But now I can say, hey, I just want to recognize and I appreciate that you're doing the right thing. And those recognitions for us, they often happen. My camera coaches make about a third of their calls are positive calls, noting either large patterns of driver star achievement or improvement in score, because that's a powerful way to recognize somebody too. Even if they only went from let's say they went from a 750 to an 850, they're below PGT's average, but they increased by 100 points. They're doing something right. So we're going to call and thank them and then congratulate them and say, hey, what's it going to take for you to get up to 950 next week? What do you think? Where we right. Work on? And in that way, you're encouraging, rewarding them. There's part of me would rather say like, hey, get it together, man. You're worse than everybody else. But I know that's not going to make a difference in affecting their behavior. It'll put up their guard and they'll want to fight, and that doesn't help me. So we frame it as a positive thing. The other way we often do these recognitions is a company-wide meeting. We meet as a company, all the staff. It's around 100 plus people. We do it 3 times a week. It started in COVID, just with us trying to manage through the crisis of what happens when they shut down all the auto plants in America. And it evolved into us taking time to work on the business rather than working in the business. It's one of the lessons we had from that period is that maybe we didn't know as much as we thought we did about what everyone else was doing. But what that meeting has evolved into is an opportunity for us to recognize excellence. So our motto is the proud professionals. We call ourselves the proud professionals. That's PGT. So we have a segment every Friday meeting. It's about half the meeting where we recognize drivers and staff. Typically, it's 2 or 3 drivers and 1 or 2 staff members who we believe have gone above and beyond in terms of excellence. And the Driver Star program is one little window into, hey, because our drivers are irregular over-the-road truck drivers. They don't come back home to a terminal every day. So we don't see them enough. This is a way for us to look in and see what are these drivers doing? Who are our best drivers? Like I know the million-mile guys. but like Adam said, that's 8+ years into a career. What do I have a new guy who is a what we call a pure student, meaning they just got their CDL and they're 6 weeks into a professional driver, but they're trying to do everything right. We'll get a guy like that on the phone and on a Zoom meeting and put him on camera in front of the president, down to the interns of our company, and clap and say, we recognize what you're doing. We see what you're doing. Keep it up, please. Like that, I truly believe is one of the most meaningful things we do for a driver to feel like he's part of a team, that what he does every day, even though he's alone in the truck, isn't unnoticed. To reward that, hey, I'm going to back off. I'm going to move over off out of the right lane if there's an emergency vehicle in the shoulder, which is required. That's another way to get a driver star, move over and give space. When we recognize those behaviors, I know they have a positive impact because they make the driver much more likely to do that again. Then we take every opportunity we can to put that on social media and celebrate it to the maximum extent possible to get mileage out of it, self-serving admittedly. But we want those drivers' wives to go on our Facebook page and see their husband standing next to their truck and see us say, hey, this guy's a proud professional. Because we know that means, first of all, he's not going to quit PGT. I think that helps us. Again, I'm not pretending this isn't self-serving. But look, these people want to feel like they're seen and recognized just like everybody else who does a job. And it's been a great opportunity for us to see, hey, you're doing something great. Instead of having to wait for 8 years for a guy to go 1,000,000 miles accident-free, which takes a lot of things going your way, on a much more micro level, allows us to get involved earlier, and I think make them more likely to be there at Heinz Field 8 years later.
I have a question. I know we have a couple questions that have been kind of brought in, and I know your fleet is not all company drivers. You know, there's a big pocket, and there's some other fleets that you're associated with that have owner operators. I wonder if you might be able to share some best practices on how to talk to to that small business owner, the owner operator, that has their own, has their own independence, but, I think they certainly rely on the culture that you work in. And how do you blend those two, that small business owner with how much you can talk to them and not coach them, coach them, not coach them, but share information and get them equally excited?
So we're about 1/3 company trucks. Those drivers are W-2 employees. And about 1/3 pure owner operators, and mixed among those are, I think, around 130 lease purchase drivers. And then we do have around 1/3 fleets, where if you, like I mentioned, that gentleman who called me a little bit ago, you got a couple of trucks, you don't want to be on your own liability coverage. We talk to you and you run under PGT's authority. We have fleets that range from 3 drivers to 100 plus. Some of those fleets, in fact, some of the biggest ones started as, 1 truck lease purchase operations that expanded. That's, those are obviously great success stories. When we started with the camera program, it was company trucks only. And we thought, well, we'll see how this goes. And we're now at 100% and have been for a couple of years. So if you have a PGT door sign, you've got a Netrodyne camera in your truck. We did that slowly over time. We did that by, persuasion. By talking to a business owner and saying, hey, look, here are accidents that are, if you didn't have the camera, liability is ambiguous, right? It's a gray zone, who merged into whom. And, like, as I mentioned, I've never driven, and I used to have drivers call me and say, you never believe what I just saw. And it's not that I wouldn't believe the driver, but it's another thing to see the video. Like, that is viscerally understanding something. And when anyone who's driven or has seen dash cam footage of trucks, I think you know what I'm talking about. It doesn't take many videos to start making a convincing argument that it's in the best interest of a small business owner to have some kind of dash cam in their truck. So we eventually convinced everyone that's the right thing to do, just from a liability perspective. Our first year with just the dash cams in our company trucks, that's only 1/3 of our fleet, we estimate that we saved over $1 million in claims that we probably would have paid out because they were ambiguous situations with liability, and maybe there was a bodily injury claim, and we don't want to let anyone who works claims know that claims get worse the longer they're open. So we have an in-house claims team, and we do things the right way, and that often means paying people when in the past, it seems like maybe it wasn't our fault. Well, now with the camera, we know like, okay, well, pretty clearly that's V2's fault. That's the other guy's fault. And so we've got a video and we'll handle things differently. So we pull together those videos and we eventually convince everybody it's the right thing to put an electronic camera in your car or in your truck. But one thing I will challenge is this notion that you have to talk to the owner operator differently in terms of the way you'd coach or use that information. I don't, and I don't believe you need to. And the reason is that I don't instruct my camera coaches to impersonate like bad state trooper actors and act like we're going to force something down anybody's throat. I have a standard and expectation of how PGT drivers behave on the road, and I don't waver from that. But the way we treat drivers is with dignity and respect, and by relying, as we've talked about, on their belief that they're good and safe drivers, and challenging them to do things like not speed, not tailgate, and to leave space around them. These are things that every professional driver has heard many times before. They heard in CDL school, and they agree, and at some level, these are the right things to do. We don't coach owner operators, or for that matter, if you work for one of our fleets, we don't coach you any differently than I'd coach a company driver. We ask everybody to do the right thing, because that's the right thing. From a liability perspective, the plaintiff's attorney doesn't really care if it's a W-2 employee or a 1099 independent contractor. If there's a liability concern, they approach it the same way. So we approach camera coaching the same way. We have a high standard, but we treat drivers with respect and dignity and ask them to do the right thing and make decisions about who doesn't belong here in the same way, regardless of what kind of tax documents are underlying the relationship between us.
So I have a follow-up, and we're getting really close to the end of the webinar, so maybe we can end it on this conversation. There's a question in from one of our attendees that starts to talk about the inward-facing camera on, off. What strategies there are. For everyone on the webinar, we had a couple-minute conversation before we started. My belief is there's pros and cons about inward-facing on, off. Obviously on, you see everything. Off, you get a little bit more driver buy-in. And there's also other strategies that plaintiff attorneys use, when the camera's on or off. Maybe you can spend a little bit of time talking about that, because I know that's one of the elements around technologies, because there's so many pros and cons. I'm interested in how you might approach that with your different driver groups. And I say driver groups because you mentioned two distinct drivers that I think are very interesting. The million-mile driver who's been with you for 8 to 10 years, and then I'll call it the new driver who's been with you for 6 weeks. And I think the care and the engagement with each one of those two drivers is completely different.
Yeah, that's fair. And look, I don't want to hold myself out as somebody who's figured any of this stuff out definitively. We evolve on these things every day to try to find ways to get better. Okay, so I can only tell you our experience. I guess that applies to all my commentary. On inward cameras, here's where we currently stand. I think I have around 180 inward cameras turned on of our, I think, a little over 1,000 cameras that are out on the road right now. Those inward cameras are largely on very new and inexperienced drivers. So if you join PGT right out of CDL school, you have your inward camera turned on. The reason I do that is, first of all, I know that we can kind of have our pick of the litter of those types of student drivers. They, haven't to some degree earned the benefit of the doubt. And I want to know. I'm not a lawyer. I know what our lawyers say about inward cameras. They have anxiety that, it could make a case worse. And that's I'll accept their analysis. They know more than I do about that. But I can tell you, and I am the kind of guy who might get deposed. I'd rather say, yeah, I've got the inward camera on. And the reason I do is because it lets me get unsafe drivers off the road or change their behaviors before someone gets hurt. And I'd rather do that, than put my head in the sand and live in some degree of self-denial about what's happening out there, because distracted driving is in my view, a totally underappreciated problem. And that is, I'm talking about all motorists, not commercial drivers exclusively. But if you want to not look and see what's going on, I guess that's your choice. But if I have a new driver who's right out of CDL school, I don't give them that freedom. And the recruiting department did not push back, and they do not see, and at least they're reporting to me, that did not cause a problem for them for recruiting that type of driver. I have no interest in spying. You understand how somebody could make, like, I don't have the time to staff someone to look inside. The camera turns off once the truck's stopped. Like, I'm not interested in spying on anybody. But what I don't want is a guy going down the road at 70 miles an hour looking at a Netflix video or on TikTok. And I'd rather have the camera on because it lets me do stuff. The last thing, and I'll stop talking so much, but in the past, if we had a driver who we suspected was on their phone, or they got cited for being on their phone, or we would have some reason to believe that they were on their phone while they were driving, like, what was my choice? I could fire the driver, or eliminate our contract if he's an IC, or I could trust him. I'll tell you, I'm not a big trust kind of guy. I'm more of a trust but verify kind of person. And the inward camera has given me a great opportunity to say, I guess I don't need to some degree rely on trust. I can say, look, do you understand? And let's talk about why this is so dangerous. And if they say all the right stuff and they commit they're not going to do it, I don't have to trust them anymore, because I'm going to get an alert on my computer that says so-and-so is on his phone and he knows what the consequences are going to be, which for us are pretty straightforward. You don't get too many strikes on that violation before you get invited to apply somewhere else. But we do that because I know it's really effective, and I don't have to rely on believing a guy's going to do the right thing. I can verify and change their behavior. And the cameras in general have allowed us to do that. It used to be a guy's involved in an accident, and I'd have to think, like, well, did he always tailgate? Like, I don't really know. I knew he was speeding or he wasn't speeding, or I kind of know how he is operationally. Is he a cooperative driver or not? And then I have to make a decision about what's going to happen in the future. Now I can look at a driver before he's involved in an accident and say, hey, he's exhibiting behaviors that are concerning to me, and I'm going to do something about it. Or, hey, he's been involved in several minor accidents, and we look at his behaviors and say, look, we're lucky this guy's been involved in a more serious accident. We need to change his behavior or change who he's driving. Yeah. And that's the argument for me. Like, I couldn't do my job without these things. It's changed the way we manage safety for the better here.
Yeah. I think the key takeaway, I mean, I actually wrote it down when you said it, is just to continue to evolve. Because even Mark, you had mentioned earlier, I'm sure the survey results 5 years ago from the survey results from this year show, the changing, approach, attitude, appreciation, recognition, all that. And I'm looking at the clock here. We're right at the time. Mark, thank you so much for administering what I believe is one of the best programs in the industry. It puts the shine on everybody, puts the shine on the drivers, the hard work that the fleets are doing, all the work that ATA is trying to do, to lobby in our favor. Andy, I cannot state how much I appreciate. I know how busy your day is, and to carve out an hour to talk about all the goodness of PGT, I truly appreciate how much, the allocation of your time. And I'm going to say thank you to everyone. Just as a reminder to all the participants, if you registered for the event, some of the slides will be shared. If we didn't get to a question that you answered, we'll do a short Q&A response over email to you, providing some of the answers to the questions. But again, please look out for future webinars. And if you ever want to reach out to myself for questions, find me on LinkedIn or go to our website, and we can close it out from there.
Thanks.
So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.